Longest Layover.
The flight home marked the end of an unforgettable chapter in my life. Studying abroad had been a whirlwind of new experiences, late-night study sessions, and friendships I'd treasure forever. I was returning to familiarity, yet I couldn't shake the bittersweet weight of leaving that life behind. It felt like closing a book whose ending I wasn't ready to face. I leaned against the airplane window, watching the glow of the setting sun on the wing. The hum of the engines was soothing, and before long, I drifted into a dreamless sleep, the weight of my emotions tugging me under. I was jolted awake by the crackle of the intercom. The captain's voice, calm yet unsettling, filled the cabin.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain. Due to unexpected weather conditions, we will be making an unscheduled landing. Please remain seated and ensure your seatbelts are securely fastened.
Blinking away sleep, I glanced out the window. The ground below was shrouded in dense fog, swirling in faint hues of gray and pale blue. It clung to the earth like something alive, shifting with an eerie grace. When the wheels touched the tarmac, there was an odd, muted thud that sent a chill down my spine. Around me, passengers whispered nervously, their unease mirroring my own. The terminal we entered was vast and sterile, stretching endlessly in all directions. It was glass and steel, coldly efficient yet profoundly unsettling. Fluorescent lights cast a harsh bluish hue, and shadows seemed to stretch and shift unnaturally. Signs flickered between languages, English, Mandarin, Arabic, too quickly to read. An announcement blared from overhead speakers, the static-laced voice robotic and unnervingly precise.
Welcome. Proceed to Terminal 7 for further instructions.
The air carried an odd scent, neither fresh nor stale, but somehow artificial, like a place abandoned yet untouched by time. The sensation was disorienting, as though the terminal existed outside normal reality. We shuffled forward in confused silence, our footsteps echoing unnaturally in the cavernous space. Conversations broke out as we moved, fragments of worry and speculation. A middle-aged man muttered about the airline's incompetence. A young couple bickered softly, their voices strained. The atmosphere grew heavier with every step, the echo of our footsteps swallowed by the vast emptiness around us. At the information desk, a man in a sharply pressed uniform greeted us with a plastic smile. His presence seemed to anchor the surreal moment, yet it only heightened the unease.
How long will the delay be?
Someone asked, desperation edging their voice.
All in good time.
The man replied, his smile never faltering. The words were polite, yet hollow, a rehearsed line devoid of meaning.
What does that mean?
A passenger pressed.
Can we get an update on the weather conditions?
The man tilted his head slightly, as though considering the question.
The situation is evolving. Please proceed to Terminal 7.
The more questions we asked, the stranger the answers became. Where are we? I ventured at one point. A staff member's head tilted slightly, as if weighing the question.
Exactly where you need to be.
Unease deepened into dread as we continued. The architecture grew more disorienting, the harsh fluorescent lights casting shadows that seemed to move on their own. Hallways looped back on themselves, and each turn brought us back to familiar places that felt subtly altered, as though the airport itself were alive and watching us. Time became meaningless. The clocks on the walls displayed conflicting times, their hands spinning erratically or stopping altogether, as if mocking the very concept of time. My own watch had ceased to tick, and my phone's battery drained inexplicably despite having been fully charged. What seemed like days stretched endlessly, each moment bleeding into the next with no markers to distinguish them. The muffled, static-laden announcements over the intercom became our only measure of passing time, but their words repeated on a maddening loop, instructions to
Proceed to Terminal 7.
Echoing endlessly. The path toward Terminal 7 seemed to stretch on forever, a maze of identical corridors that offered no reprieve. The fluorescent lights flickered unpredictably, casting stark, uneven shadows that danced on the walls as though alive. The hallways twisted and branched in nonsensical ways, looping back to places we were certain we had already passed. Some corridors ended abruptly in blank walls, while others led to open spaces filled with rows of chairs facing walls of fogged glass, where reflections moved independently of the figures seated. The air in these areas felt heavier, as if the atmosphere itself were pressing down, and the silence was oppressive, broken only by faint, disembodied whispers. The excuses from the staff, clad in impeccable uniforms with faces too smooth and too symmetrical to be real, grew increasingly surreal.
Weather interference.
One of them claimed, even as the fog outside seemed more like a solid wall than any natural phenomenon.
Mechanical inspections.
Another said, their smile wide and plastic, though no mechanics ever appeared. Their rehearsed lines had a chilling monotony, delivered with an eerie calm that suggested they were reciting from a script. Their eyes, devoid of warmth or recognition, seemed to follow us, tracking our movements as though we were under constant surveillance. They were mannequins, animated by a sinister force, lifelike, but utterly devoid of humanity. Each attempt to navigate closer to Terminal 7 left us more disoriented. The signs overhead flickered between languages and symbols that became increasingly abstract, their meanings inscrutable. The floors beneath our feet sometimes felt solid, other times like shifting sand, and our steps grew heavier with each passing moment. It was as if the very architecture of the airport conspired against us, warping reality into an endless liminal trap. The longer we walked, the more the corridors seemed to stretch, their walls narrowing slightly as though urging us onward, deeper into the suffocating maze. Occasionally, we would stumble upon areas that felt eerily familiar, places we could have sworn we had passed hours before. Yet each time, something was slightly off, a chair tilted at an impossible angle, a light fixture casting shadows that should not have existed, a faint smell of burnt meat and plastic lingering in the air. The oppressive dread built with each step, a growing certainty that Terminal 7 was not a destination but a cruel mirage designed to keep us moving, to prevent us from stopping long enough to question where we truly were. I turned to the other passengers, seeking comfort in shared confusion. David was the first to catch my attention. He was tall and impeccably dressed, the kind of man who exuded authority. Yet here, his suit was wrinkled, and his jaw tight with frustration. "What do you think is going on?" I asked one evening as he stared into the fog.
I think we're being lied to,
He said, his voice sharp.
This isn't how airlines handle delays. I've flown more times than I can count, and nothing about this is normal. It's like they're pretending to help, but really, they don't give a damn.
His hand gripped the edge of a nearby bench, knuckles white.
No one's coming to fix this. No one's coming at all.
Sarah and Mark, a newlywed couple, were a study in contrasts. Sarah clung to optimism, though her voice grew thinner each time she spoke.
We were supposed to be in Miami by now,
She said, forcing a laugh as she leaned on Mark's shoulder.
This is just a weird story we'll tell at our anniversary, right?
Mark didn't respond. When I caught him alone later, his words were heavier.
She's trying to keep me together.
He admitted.
But this place, it's like it's eating away at everything real. The air feels different, you know? It's like it doesn't want us to leave.
Robert, the elder among us, maintained a steady calm at first.
Patience.
He said, his weathered face soft with reassurance.
Airlines mess up all the time. They'll sort it out eventually.
But his patience cracked as the silence grew heavier.
I spent 40 years teaching kids.
He told me during one late-night conversation.
I've been in every chaotic situation you can imagine, but this is something else. It's like detention for the soul, and I don't even know what I did wrong.
Ethan, a boy no older than 7, clutched his worn stuffed bear tightly. He rarely spoke, but when he did, his words carried a weight far beyond his years.
Mom says I should have gone with her.
He told me one night, his voice barely above a whisper. When I asked what he meant, he simply stared at me with solemn eyes and said,
She told me not to be scared.
The terminal itself seemed alive. Hallways looped back on themselves without warning, and the lighting flickered unpredictably, creating phantom movements in the corner of your vision. I tried to find a map, but every digital screen displayed the same message: proceed to Terminal 7. The fog outside seemed thicker each time I looked, pressing harder against the glass. It had no end, no shape, no horizon. Just infinity.
What's the last thing you remember before getting on the plane?
Robert asked during one of our endless conversations. The question sent a shiver through me. The details of my own life felt slippery, fragmented. I was coming back from school, I said. But even as I spoke, the memory felt distant, like recalling a dream. Around us, the others exchanged uneasy glances. No one answered Robert's question with certainty. The dreams began in what felt like another eternity. Dreams that weren't dreams but vivid, searing memories that replayed with cruel detail. I saw myself in the hospital again, staring at my oncologist as she delivered the news. Only this time, I didn't walk out of the room. Instead, I saw myself lying in a coffin, my skin gray and waxy, the air around me thick with the sickly sweet smell of lilies. I woke up gasping, drenched in sweat. Across the terminal, Sarah was staring blankly into the distance. She later told me her own nightmare, the night the cruise ship capsized, and she clung to wreckage while the sea pulled others under. Her hair was damp when she spoke, though the air here was bone dry. Others began to share their dreams, hesitantly at first, then with the urgency of confession. David spoke of the car crash he survived, flames licking at his suit as he crawled from the wreckage.
I left someone behind,
He admitted, his voice trembling.
I thought I'd buried that guilt, but it's alive here.
Robert described the heart attack that nearly claimed him, the sensation of being tethered between life and death.
In the dream, no one comes.
He said softly.
I just stay there.
Ethan pulled at my sleeve one evening, his voice so quiet I had to lean in to hear him.
I see my mom.
He said,
She keeps saying, why didn't you come with me?
We decided to act. A small group of us resolved to leave, to escape whatever force held us captive. Together we navigated the seemingly endless corridors, their walls cold and glistening as though perpetually wet. The harsh fluorescent lights overhead flickered intermittently, casting jagged shadows that moved as if alive. Each step echoed unnaturally, the sound swallowed by the oppressive silence, only to re-emerge seconds later, distorted and unfamiliar. The architecture of the terminal seemed to shift with every turn, as if the building were a living, breathing labyrinth. Hallways stretched impossibly long, their vanishing points blurred by a murky haze. Occasionally, we would pass empty gates where rows of identical, lifeless chairs sat in perfect alignment, all facing darkened windows that revealed nothing but the endless fog pressing against the glass. The gates bore no numbers, only symbols, twisted abstract shapes that seemed to pulse faintly when observed too long. Strange, inexplicable noises emanated from the walls, faint whispers that could almost be words, distant footsteps echoing just out of sight. And the rhythmic hum of machinery that grew louder the closer we ventured to Terminal 7. Doors appeared where none had been moments before, their surfaces pristine but cold to the touch. An opening one revealed not a room but another identical corridor, looping back on itself in impossible ways. We quickly learned not to trust the doors. The air grew heavier the farther we went, thick with an artificial chill that seeped into our skin. It smelled faintly of antiseptic and decay, a scent that lingered in the back of the throat. The fluorescent lights began to flicker more erratically, casting brief flashes of utter darkness. In those fleeting moments, it felt as though we were not alone, as if shapes loomed just beyond our sight, vanishing when the light returned. At one point, we came across a luggage carousel, its conveyor belt grinding noisily under the weight of battered suitcases. The sight was almost mundane, yet it filled me with inexplicable dread. The suitcases circled endlessly, their surfaces scuffed and torn, as if they had been dragged through countless journeys yet belonged to no one. A passenger reached out to touch one, only to recoil sharply as though shocked by static.
Don't touch them,
someone muttered, their voice trembling. No one asked why. As we approached what we thought might be Terminal 7, the whispers grew louder, almost urgent. The walls themselves seemed to pulse faintly, their surfaces shifting between smooth steel and something organic. Panic rose within our group, but there was no turning back. The corridors behind us had vanished into a dense, impenetrable fog. We clung to one another, our shared dread the only thing grounding us in the increasingly surreal nightmare. By the time we reached the heavy doors leading to the tarmac, our resolve was hanging by a thread. The air beyond them seemed to shimmer unnaturally, a distortion that made it impossible to discern what lay ahead. Yet we pushed forward, driven by the desperate hope of escape. As the doors creaked open, the fog surged inward, cold and suffocating, carrying with it the faintest trace of whispers, no longer distant but right at our ears, murmuring words we couldn't understand but somehow feared all the same. The ground beneath our feet felt unreal, as if we were walking on the edge of a dream. Each step became heavier, and the whispers turned to low, mournful wails. Just as despair threatened to consume us completely, everything dissolved. I woke up with a gasp. The plane shuddered violently, the cabin lights flickering. Around me, passengers clung to their armrests, their faces pale with fear. The engines whined, a piercing, otherworldly sound that reverberated through my body. The intercom buzzed, and the captain's voice, strained but steady, filled the cabin.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are experiencing severe turbulence. Please fasten your seatbelts and brace for an emergency landing.
The air was thick with panic. Around me, passengers cried and prayed, their hands gripping anything for stability. The cabin tilted violently, throwing trays and belongings into chaos. My stomach dropped as the plane plummeted, the engines roaring in a desperate, uneven cadence. The windows framed nothing but darkness and streaks of lightning, the ground invisible beneath the storm. A deafening boom echoed through the cabin as the plane bucked violently. I closed my eyes, tears streaming down my face, and braced for the inevitable. The last thing I felt was the sickening jolt of impact, a shattering, all-encompassing force that consumed everything. Then, nothing.
Not every journey takes you where you intended. For the passengers of Flight 815, the terminal wasn't just a stop, it was a labyrinth of regret, of choices left unresolved, and the echoes of lives unfinished. Maybe their flight never had a destination, or maybe it was never meant to leave. Thank you for stepping into the unknown with the Haunt Vault. If this tale left you haunted, like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell to join us for more stories that linger long after the final word.
Where do you go when there's nowhere left to land?
Until next time, stay curious and stay haunted.